The gravel road, long since surrendered to weeds and encroaching forest, finally gave way to a crumbling drive. My old sedan, a faithful but protesting companion, shuddered to a halt before the wrought-iron gates. They were magnificent, rusted sentinels, crowned with a coat of arms I vaguely recognized from a faded photograph in the inheritance packet. This was it. The ancestral estate. My inheritance. I pushed open the gates, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the oppressive stillness of the late afternoon. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but expectant, as if the very air held its breath. The house loomed at the end of the drive, a sprawling, gothic behemoth, half swallowed by ivy and neglect. Stone gargoyles, their faces eroded by centuries of weather, peered down from the battlements, their expressions frozen in perpetual grimaces. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum for forgotten dreams. A distant relative I'd never met, a reclusive figure named Elias, had passed away under circumstances the estate lawyer had delicately termed unusual. No family, no will, just a cryptic clause in some ancient trust naming me, Dean, the last living descendant, as the sole heir. I'd seen the local news clippings online, vague reports of an isolated discovery, no foul play suspected, but a lingering sense of unease in the sparse details. The townsfolk, according to a brief, uncomfortable call with the estate's appointed caretaker, preferred not to talk about Elias or the house. I dismissed it as small-town gossip, the kind of superstitious nonsense that festered in remote places. I was a city man, practical, grounded. Ghosts and curses were for dime novels, not real life. This was simply a very old, very large, and very inconvenient property. The entryway was a cavernous space, draped in cobwebs like ancient lace. I spent the next few hours simply walking, trying to get a lay of the land. Room after room revealed itself, each one a time capsule of a life lived and then abruptly abandoned. Furniture shrouded in white sheets like ghosts, faded tapestries depicting hunting scenes, rows of leather-bound books crumbling on shelves. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. My initial determination, my practical resolve, began to fray at the edges. I found myself drawn deeper into the house, past the grand reception rooms and the formal dining hall, into wings that seemed to have been forgotten even by Elias. I pushed open a door, warped and stiff, leading into a long, narrow passage. The air here was different, heavier, thick with a scent that made the hair on my arms stand up, ozone and something else, something acrid and deeply unpleasant, like rust mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness. The walls of the corridor were unplastered brick, stained with what looked like ancient damp. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a series of heavy wooden doors set into the brick, each one bearing a faded, hand-painted number. They were barred from the outside with thick, rusted iron bolts. And then I saw it, etched roughly into the brick above the last door, almost obscured by grime, yet starkly clear, old death row corridor marked for closure. My breath hitched. My mind, so accustomed to rationalizing, fumbled. What in God's name was this? An ancestral estate doesn't just have a wing like this. This wasn't some quirky architectural choice. This was deliberate. The implication hung in the air, a suffocating weight. This place wasn't just old, it was something else. Elias, I thought, had lived here, alone, with this. What did he know? What had he seen? I backed away slowly, the hair on the back of my neck prickling. The numbered doors, the iron bolts, the terrifying inscription, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying truth that defied all my skepticism. This house had a past, a history far more sinister than mere unusual circumstances. I retreated to what I hoped would be a habitable room, a smaller study near the front, and tried to light a fire in the hearth. The logs, damp with age, stubbornly refused to catch, filling the room with smoke and the smell of damp wood. Outside, the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky, replaced by an inky blackness that seemed to press in on the house from all sides. Not physically, but subtly, sonically. Every creak of the old timbers sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind rattling a loose pane felt like a breath against my neck. It felt like I wasn't alone. A low groan, deep and resonant, vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a settling sound, it was too deliberate, too heavy. It came from somewhere far below, or perhaps, from within the very fabric of the house itself. My practical mind scrambled for an explanation: old pipes, the wind, the house itself protesting my presence. I wasn't just inheriting a house. I was inheriting whatever had been waiting inside it. And it had been waiting a very, very long time. I retreated to what I hoped would be a habitable room, a smaller study near the front, and tried to light a fire in the hearth. Outside, the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky, replaced by a deep, bruised indigo. The smoke stung my eyes, but I kept at it, blowing gently, coaxing the reluctant embers. It was a small victory I desperately needed. Finally, a few tendrils of flame licked at the kindling, crackling weakly. I leaned back on my heels, wiping soot from my cheek, and surveyed the room. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering from the window, swirling like tiny, lost galaxies. The silence of the house pressed in, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Then I heard it. A faint scraping, like fingernails dragging across rough plaster, from somewhere above me. My head snapped up. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the soft hiss of the struggling fire. Just the house settling. Dean, I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud in the quiet. It's ancient. Probably a family of mice. I spent the evening trying to make the study remotely comfortable. I cleared a space on a small writing desk, polished away a century of grime, and set out the few books I'd brought. Every creak of the floorboards upstairs, every groan from the old timbers, made me flinch. I told myself it was just nerves, the isolation getting to me. I was tired, that was all. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful, punctuated by the unfamiliar noises of the sprawling estate. I woke before dawn, the air in the room biting cold. The fire had long since died. The next morning, I decided to tackle the kitchen. It was a cavernous space, smelling faintly of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place, a cloying sweetness, like forgotten fruit. As I sorted through rusted pots and pans, a small, ornate silver locket, tarnished black with age, caught my eye. It lay on the floor, half hidden beneath a fallen cupboard door. Odd. I didn't remember seeing it yesterday when I'd first poked my head in, and I certainly hadn't brought it. My distant relative had been a recluse. It wasn't surprising to find forgotten trinkets, but its placement felt deliberate. I picked it up. No initials, no engraving. I tucked it into my pocket, a meaningless curiosity. Later, while trying to clear a path through the overgrown conservatory, I started hearing it again. This time, it wasn't scraping. A low, drawn-out sigh that seemed to curl around the sound of the wind. I stopped, pruning shears hanging uselessly in my hand. Hello? I called out, my voice swallowed by the echoing space. Is anyone there? Only the rustle of dead leaves and the groan of the old glass panels answered me. This wasn't settling wood or mice. This was different. I forced myself to be rational. It's the wind, I argued aloud, my voice a little too sharp. Just the wind finding its way through the old structure. It sounded almost like a name. Dean. Or was it just my imagination, twisting the sound into something personal? The rest of the day was a blur of heightened senses. I found the locket I'd put in my pocket that morning on the mantelpiece in the study. I distinctly remembered putting it in my left pocket. I picked it up, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. Had I put it there? My memory was usually reliable. I was just stressed, I told myself, my mind playing games. Maybe understanding its past would demystify its present. I found a dusty old chest in the library, filled with journals, ledgers, and architectural drawings. Most were indecipherable, faded with time, but one roll of blueprints, tied with a brittle string, caught my attention. It was a detailed layout of the entire property, dating back centuries. I unrolled it carefully on the wide library table, tracing the lines with my finger. The main house, the grounds, the stables, even the old disused chapel, it was all there. But then my fingers stopped. Tucked away in a section of the blueprint, almost an afterthought, was an addition I couldn't place. I stared at the words, my mind racing. Here? On my ancestral estate? It wasn't a part of the house I recognized, nor was it indicated on any of the modern maps of the property. There were small, identical cells depicted, each with a heavy, barred door. This wasn't some fanciful local legend. This was a blueprint. Tangible, undeniable proof of something grim. Something was here. And it knew about that corridor. It knew about me. A sudden, sharp rap echoed from the floor directly above me. It wasn't a creak. It was a distinct, deliberate knock. My head snapped up, my gaze fixed on the ceiling. I wasn't alone. The whisper from the previous evening clung to me, a phantom echo in the quiet house. I tried to shake it off, dismissing it as fatigue, as the natural creaks and groans of an old building settling. But the house didn't settle. It stirred. The antique wardrobe in the corner appeared to bulge, its carved oak face twisting into something grotesque, like a silent scream. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to be still, to be wood, just wood. When I dared to peek again, it was back to normal, solid and unmoving. But the image of its distortion was seared behind my eyelids. Then came the nightmares. They weren't like anything I'd experienced before. I was back in the house, but it was different. Walls pulsed with a sickly, organic light. Dean. The voice was ancient, parched, yet full of a terrible hunger. I saw flashes of skeletal hands reaching from cracks in the plaster, heard the guttural rasp of a breath that wasn't mine. I'd wake up gasping, clutching my chest, the phantom stench of decay lingering in my nostrils, the image of those hands etched in my mind. The morning offered no respite. The lines between what I dreamed and what I was truly experiencing began to blur. Was that a flicker in my reflection? A brief, almost imperceptible shift in my expression, a widening of the eyes that wasn't my own? My determination, though frayed, still held. I needed answers. This house wasn't just old, it was actively hostile. I decided to explore the parts of the estate I hadn't yet touched, the forgotten corners, hoping to find some logical explanation for the growing strangeness. I ventured into the sprawling, unlit basements, guided only by the beam of my phone's flashlight. I moved through a maze of storage rooms, filled with forgotten furniture draped in white sheets that looked like an assembly of ghosts. It was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and descended further into the earth. The passage opened into a long, low-ceilinged chamber. The air here was utterly still, devoid of any natural draft, yet it carried a faint, coppery tang. The walls were bare, made of rough-hewn stone, scarred with countless scratches and gouges. Heavy, rusted iron doors, each with a small, grimy peephole, lined one side, leading to what must have been individual cells. As I walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing unnervingly, I noticed something on one of the cell walls. Not just random scratches, but deliberate markings. Crude, almost desperate carvings. Figures, stick-like and contorted, seemed to dance in a grotesque tableau. My gaze dropped lower, to a small cavity in the stone, almost hidden by a loose piece of mortar. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something brittle. I pulled it out carefully. It was a rusted tin box, no bigger than my palm. The latch gave way with a faint, protesting squeal. Beneath it, a folded piece of parchment, yellowed and fragile. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a child's drawing, rendered in faded charcoal. It depicted the house, but not as I knew it. In the foreground, a figure stood. And again, scrawled beneath the drawing in the same childish hand that had drawn the house, were the words, "He waits. He is hungry. Don't let him in." The air grew impossibly heavy. The coppery scent intensified, making my stomach churn. My mind reeled. This wasn't some local legend, some superstitious old wives' tale. This was a warning, a desperate plea from someone who had known. The new blood, that was me. The entity wasn't just a figment of my imagination, a byproduct of stress and isolation. It was real. It had been waiting. And now, I was here. My inheritance. My terrifying truth. The cracks in my reality were no longer subtle, they were gaping chasms, threatening to swallow me whole. The coppery scent intensified, making my stomach churn. Someone who had seen. The new blood, that was me. The entity wanted me. It needed me. A cold certainty settled in my gut, replacing the initial shock. Fear still gnawed, a constant vibration beneath my skin, but now it was laced with a grim resolve. Running was pointless. The house wouldn't let me. I had to understand what I was up against. I started my search methodically. The library, a vast, dust-choked room I'd barely touched, seemed the most logical place. Generations of accumulated knowledge, or at least forgotten curiosities, lay entombed there. I spent hours, my fingers grimed with ancient dust, pulling down leather-bound tomes, sifting through brittle documents. Most were mundane, ledgers of forgotten harvests, property deeds, and dry historical accounts of the region. My progress was slow, frustratingly so, until a loose floorboard near the back of the library caught my eye. I knelt, scraping away decades of grime with my fingernail, revealing a faint seam. It wasn't a floorboard at all, but a cleverly disguised panel. With a grunt, I pried it open. A gust of stale, earthy air, thick with the smell of damp stone and something vaguely metallic, wafted up. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. This was it. This was where the answers were hidden. I grabbed a powerful lantern from the study and descended into the black maw. The steps were rough-hewn stone, uneven and slick with a fine layer of moisture. It wasn't a cellar, not exactly. The architecture felt wrong, repurposed. Each door was sealed shut, bolted from the outside with thick, corroded bars. The air here was heavy, not just with damp and decay, but with a palpable sense of despair, a lingering echo of confinement. This wasn't part of the original house, I realized. It had been built into the house, or perhaps the house had been built around it. Why? Who would build such a place, then seal it away? My breath plumed in the frigid air. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gritty floor and the frantic thrumming in my ears. My skin crawled. At the very end of the corridor, where the wall seemed to crumble into a rough-hewn rock face, a single, unbarred wooden door stood slightly ajar. It looked older than the concrete corridor, perhaps a remnant of whatever structure predated this grim addition. A sliver of light, not from my lantern, seemed to emanate from within. Pushing the door open, I stepped into a small, circular room. It was bare, save for a single, rickety wooden table and a stool. On the table, beneath a thin layer of dust, lay a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn smooth, almost black with age, and embossed with the same jagged, incomplete circle I'd seen in the library. My hands trembled as I reached for it. I opened it to a random page. The handwriting was cramped, frantic, almost illegible in places. It was dated over a century ago. April 14th. It watches. Always watches. It feeds on the quiet desperation, the gnawing certainty that no one hears, no one cares. My brother, he sees it now too. Fool. You cannot starve what feeds on you. My eyes darted to the next entry, a few pages later. May 2nd. They speak of my failings, my fears. It knows them all. It amplifies them. The isolation here. It is its greatest weapon. My mind. It feels like a cage, and the bars are my own doubts. The family. We were chosen. A bloodline of torment. It needs us. This wasn't just a journal, it was a confession, a testament. The writer, a distant ancestor, had understood. He hadn't just lived in this house, he had built this corridor, or repurposed it, for a reason. To contain something? Or to contain himself? June 1st. This corridor. These cells. I thought I could contain the despair, isolate the fear, but it laughs. It permeates. It is in the very stones. It finds the cracks, the weaknesses. The ink was smeared in places, as if the writer's hand had trembled violently. The scent of copper, faint but distinct, began to prickle in the air around me. It was no longer just a smell, it was a presence, growing stronger, closer. July 10th. The new blood will come. It always does. The cycle continues. The hunger never truly sleeps. It waits for the isolation, for the fear. For the new blood. I slammed the journal shut. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the small room. The air was thick, suffocating. The entity wasn't just in the house, it was of the house. And it had been waiting for me, Dean, the new blood. It had been waiting for my fear. And now, it knew I was here, reading the secrets, unraveling its history. It knew I was afraid. And it was hungry. I slammed the journal shut. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the small room. The air was thick, suffocating. I felt a profound, chilling cold emanate from the walls themselves, from the very stones that had witnessed such despair. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a different kind of fear than the sharp, sudden terror I'd felt before. This was a slow, creeping realization, a suffocating certainty. I wasn't just a visitor, I was prey. And the hunt had begun. My determination, however, wasn't completely shattered. Not yet. My mind raced, pushing past the tendrils of panic. I wasn't going to become another entry in that cursed journal. I stood, pushing away from the heavy desk, my chair scraping harshly against the floorboards. Nothing. Each footfall felt heavy, as if the floor itself was resisting my movement. The doorknob, when I reached it, was icy to the touch, and it turned with a groan that seemed to come from deep within the wood itself. My phone. I needed to call for help. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, pulling out the cold metal. The screen glowed, mocking me with its full signal bars. Relief, sharp and sudden, almost made me dizzy. I scrolled to my emergency contacts, the estate lawyer, a colleague, even the local police, though I wasn't sure what I'd tell them. My thumb hovered over the lawyer's name. I heard a faint, high-pitched whine, like wind whistling through a broken window, but there were no windows nearby. The sound intensified, growing into a grating static that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my feet. My phone screen flickered violently, the signal bars dissolving into a blizzard of digital noise. The battery icon, previously full, plummeted, draining before my eyes until the screen went black. I jabbed the power button, then the volume, then everything. The phone was dead. Utterly, completely dead. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a malfunction. This was it. Panic clawed at me, sharper now, more insistent. Forget calling. I spun, heading for the main staircase, my only thought to get to the front door, to my car. The air grew heavy, like wading through thick water. I pushed through it, forcing my legs to move faster, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I reached the bottom of the grand staircase, my gaze fixed on the heavy oak front door. It looked impossibly far away, an unreachable sanctuary. As I started across the foyer, a deep, resonant rumble vibrated through the floor. It wasn't thunder, it was deeper, more guttural, like the house itself sighing. From the corner of my eye, I saw it, the colossal, ancient grandfather clock in the corner, a relic I'd barely noticed before, shuddering violently. Its pendulum swung with an erratic, unnatural force, striking the sides of its wooden case with sickening thuds. The glass face cracked, a spider web of fissures spreading from its center, and then, with a final, mournful clang, the clock stopped. Its hands pointed straight up, to midnight. A gust of icy wind swept through the foyer, though all the windows were shut and locked. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through the high panes, swirling like tiny, frantic spirits. The sound of a door slamming shut echoed from somewhere deep within the house, followed by a series of smaller, rhythmic thuds, like something being dragged. I froze, listening. The sounds were coming from the back of the house, from an area I hadn't properly explored yet. My rational mind screamed at me to keep going, to ignore it and get out. Was it trying to scare me away, or draw me deeper in? Against my better judgment, I turned, my path diverging from the front door. The walls were rough-hewn stone, the floor uneven flagstones. It was like stepping into an ancient tomb. Then I saw it. The passage ended in a heavy, iron-barred gate, rusted and ancient, bearing a weather-beaten wooden sign nailed precariously above it. Death Row? Here? In my ancestral home? The implications were horrifying, a grotesque twist on the family legacy. This wasn't just a house, it was a prison. From beyond the bars, I heard a faint, persistent dripping sound. Drip. 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 It was slow, agonizingly regular, echoing in the confined space. My eyes strained into the gloom beyond the gate. So faint I almost dismissed it as my own terrified imagination. It was formless, shapeless, yet it seemed to coalesce just beyond the bars, a breath against my ear, though no one was there. It wasn't words, not really. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. My skin crawled. It was a suffocating sensation, like being held underwater. The whisper intensified, becoming a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my teeth. This corridor wasn't just an old part of the house, it was a focal point. A place where suffering had been concentrated, distilled, and preserved. And the house, the entity, whatever it was, had led me here. It wasn't trying to scare me away from it, it was showing me. Showing me where it had truly begun. I wasn't just trapped in the house. I was trapped by it. The house itself was a living, breathing cage, and it had simply decided to reveal another one of its many bars. My escape attempt had not only failed, it had merely led me deeper into its terrifying embrace. The entity knew I was trying to leave. And it had decided to teach me a lesson. I wasn't going anywhere. Not until it was done with me. My determination, so defiant moments ago, crumbled. A wave of profound despair washed over me, heavier than any physical weight. I was utterly, irrevocably alone. And the house had just tightened its grip. It was one with the house. An extension. A malignant, ancient heart beating within the stone and timber, and I had been foolish enough to walk right into its chest cavity. I snatched my hand back from the journal as if it had scorched me. My skin prickled, every hair on my arms standing on end, not from a draft, but from an unseen pressure, an attention that felt tangible and malicious. My mind reeled. Superstition, I'd called it. Local legends. A convenient story for the lonely old house. But the journal entries, scribbled in that frantic, looping hand, spoke of something else entirely. Something real, hungry, and waiting. I had to know. My sanity, perhaps my very life, depended on it. I flipped through the brittle pages, past the earlier ramblings, searching for the core of it, the terrible truth. The script grew wilder, the ink often smudged as if the writer had been weeping or shaking uncontrollably. It spoke of an ancient entity, predating even the first stones of the estate. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but something primal, elemental, drawn to this specific nexus of sorrow and isolation. Not a simple agreement, but a blood binding, a horrific exchange initiated by an ancestor centuries ago. A patriarch, desperate for power, for wealth, for longevity beyond mortal means, had sought out this entity. He had offered something unspeakable, not just his own soul, but the souls of his descendants, an endless buffet for the entity's insatiable hunger. The ritual itself was a slow, agonizing process. It involved the deliberate cultivation of fear and despair within the chosen one, an heir, isolated within these very walls. The fear wasn't just a byproduct, it was the fuel. The isolation wasn't accidental, it was the trap. The journal spoke of a harvest, a final, culminating moment when the chosen vessel, utterly broken and terrified, would be consumed entirely, their identity erased, their suffering becoming part of the entity's own vast, ancient consciousness. My hands, still clutching the journal, began to ache. The meticulous descriptions, the precise timings, the specific locations within the house where the preparations were made, it was all there. And then, a name. My own name, scrawled in a shaky, almost illegible hand, underlined multiple times. Dean. The inheritor. The next in line. I wasn't just here to clean out an old house, I was the next course. The final sacrifice. The vessel, carefully nurtured, slowly driven to madness, ready for the harvest. The air in the room grew heavier, thicker, pressing down on me. I felt a distinct, frigid breath ghost across my neck, though no window was open, no draft present. Welcome home. I shoved the journal away, scrambling backward from the small desk, overturning the rickety chair. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint, unseen light, shifting and breathing around me. It turned with a groan that seemed to resonate through the very floorboards. Beyond it, a narrow, unlit passage stretched into absolute blackness. It was a smell I knew, though I couldn't place it immediately, a metallic tang beneath the rot. My mind screamed at me to turn back, but the journal's words, the terrible truth they held, had carved a path into my mind, a desperate need to see, to understand the full scope of this nightmare. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight beam cutting a weak, wavering path into the gloom. The passage led down a short flight of steps, slick with what felt like perpetual dampness. My boots crunched on something gritty underfoot, fine dust, crumbling mortar. My body went rigid. Death row. This wasn't just an old house, it was a prison. A place of deliberate suffering, engineered despair. The entity wasn't just feeding, it was feasting. And I was trapped within its carefully constructed larder. The corridor stretched on, a claustrophobic tunnel of rough-hewn stone. On either side, heavy iron doors, rusted and scarred, stood shut, each one a testament to forgotten horrors. The air here was heavy with a palpable sorrow, a thick residue of anguish that clung to the stone, the air, and now, to me. This was where they had been prepared. This was where the fear had been cultivated, distilled, made potent. I was no longer an observer, I was the center of its attention, its next meal. The pact was real. The ritual was real. And I, Dean, was bound to it. The journal lay splayed on the floor, its brittle pages whispering secrets I hadn't wanted to hear, secrets that burned behind my eyes. It wasn't just a haunting, it was a parasitic legacy woven into the very stone and timber of this place, waiting, always waiting, for the next inheritor, for me. The entity fed on fear, on isolation, on the festering wound of a hidden family shame. And I, in my arrogance, had walked right into its jaws. The journal, written by a desperate ancestor, detailed not just the entity's origins but also the desperate, incomplete attempts to contain it. The final, scribbled entries spoke of one last, terrifying possibility, a counter-ritual, a severance, requiring a confrontation not with fists, but with will, in the heart of its oldest feeding ground. A cold dread turned my blood to slush, but beneath it, a spark ignited. A fury, sharp and desperate. No. Not my soul. Not my sanity. I wouldn't be another name in a long line of victims. I wouldn't let this thing consume me. My legs, leaden moments before, now found a tremor of purpose. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something acrid, like old iron in sorrow. Every floorboard groaned under my weight, a chorus of protest from the house itself. It knew. It was fighting me, trying to keep me trapped in the paralysis of fear. But I wouldn't yield. The journal had mentioned a hidden stairwell behind the old servants' quarters, long boarded up. My fingers, surprisingly steady, found the faint outline of a doorframe beneath layers of peeling wallpaper. With a surge of adrenaline, I kicked, splintering the aged wood. Beyond the shattered door, a spiral of stone steps descended into absolute blackness. The walls here were rough-hewn stone, slimy with condensation. Turn back. You are alone. You are weak. Surrender. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the insidious suggestions. The stairs opened into a vast, cavernous space, the ceiling lost in the gloom. It wasn't a metaphor. It was real. The air here was thick with a palpable despair, a lingering echo of countless last breaths. The smell was overpowering now, rust, decay, and the cloying sweetness of rot. The journal had described the final cell, number 13, as the nexus. I walked, my boots crunching on something gritty on the floor, past the silent, gaping mouths of the cells. Each door seemed to pulse with a faint, internal glow, like dying embers. Helpless. Forgotten. Abandoned. I reached cell 13. Its door hung ajar, twisted on one hinge, exposing a square of absolute blackness within. The air here was a solid block of ice. The journal had been specific, a simple act, an offering of defiance, not of blood, but of truth. I had to acknowledge the secret, speak it aloud in this place of its birth, and in doing so, sever the entity's hold. The entity responded, a sudden, crushing weight pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. Images flashed behind my eyes, the detective's skeptical face, the colleague's pity, my own reflection, gaunt and wild-eyed. It tried to show me my future, alone, raving, locked away. They hadn't imprisoned it, they had fed it, hoping to control it. And now it controlled them, their legacy. I know what you are, I croaked, my voice raw. I know what they did. They created you, nurtured you with their cruelty, with the suffering in these very cells. A wave of nausea washed over me as the entity retaliated, a torrent of mental static, a scream of pure, formless rage that threatened to rip my mind apart. My head pounded, my vision blurring. I reject this inheritance. I sever the connection. You have no hold over me, over this house, over this family. The pressure intensified, 1,000 needles piercing my skull. My eyes squeezed shut, but the visions persisted, a flash of my distant relative's terrified face, then his vacant stare. It wanted me to give in, to join the chorus of despair that resonated in this corridor. It represented something pure, something untainted by this lineage. The journal had mentioned a personal sacrifice, a symbol of severance. This was it. As it touched the stone, a tremor ran through the corridor. The air grew impossibly heavy, then, with a sound like tearing fabric, something shifted. It was still here. Still alive, but something had changed. The connection, the bloodline, had been challenged. The cycle, for the first time in generations, had been broken. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering, my body trembling uncontrollably. The growl intensified, a sound of frustrated, ancient rage. The air vibrated with its fury. I had severed its tether, but I hadn't destroyed it. And it was very, very angry. I reached into my pocket, my fingers fumbling, desperate for anything real, anything solid to ground me against the onslaught. My hand closed around the small, crumpled photograph I'd kept since I was a kid, a faded snapshot of my mother, laughing, her arm around my younger self. It was a lifeline. The pressure inside my head intensified, a drill boring through bone. The visions flickered faster now, not just my relative's face, but others, too fleeting, indistinct forms, contorted in silent screams. The air grew frigid, a cold that didn't just chill the skin but seeped into the marrow, extinguishing the last embers of hope. I could taste dust and something metallic, like old blood, on my tongue. I squeezed the photograph, its crinkled edges digging into my palm. My mother's smile, even faded, was a defiant beacon against the encroaching gloom. I forced my eyes open, staring at the gray, peeling paint of the corridor wall directly in front of me, trying to anchor myself to its crumbling reality. The whispers swelled, a cacophony of agony that wasn't just sound, but a direct assault on my mind. Each syllable was a spike, driving deeper, threatening to shatter my resolve. My relative's vacant stare flashed again, but this time, it wasn't just a vision, it was a feeling, a profound, bottomless despair that wasn't my own, yet threatened to consume me. This was the truth, the sickening reveal. The house didn't just feed on fear, it recycled it, projected it, made you inhabit the final, agonizing moments of its previous victims. The entity wasn't just a malevolent presence, it was a parasitic consciousness, a compilation of all the fear and despair, seeking to perpetuate itself by overriding new minds with old horrors. A shudder ran through me, not of fear, but of profound, gut-wrenching understanding. This was its game. To make me relive, to make me be the past. But the photograph, clutched in my hand, was my shield. It was a fragment of my past, my life, my identity. "You won't have me," I snarled, the words tasting like grit and iron. I pressed the photograph against my forehead, closing my eyes again, but this time, not in surrender. I focused on the faint image, on the warmth of my mother's smile, on the distant memory of her laughter. I pushed back, not with anger, but with a stubborn, desperate refusal to let go of me. The entity recoiled, a shriek that ripped through my skull, not of sound, but of pure psychic agony. The frigid air around me convulsed, and a sudden, violent gust of wind howled through the silent corridor, stirring dust and debris. The pressure in my head didn't vanish instantly, but it fractured, splintered, like a cracked pane of glass. The visions flickered one last time, dissolving into indistinct gray before fading altogether. I stood there, swaying, gasping for breath, the photograph still pressed to my forehead. My legs felt like jelly, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. Different. A thin, spiderweb crack had appeared in the plaster directly in front of me, branching out from where I had been staring, a fresh wound on the decaying wall. The photograph slipped from my grasp, landing face down in the dust. I didn't reach for it. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't trust them. My mind felt scoured clean, raw and exposed. The immediate confrontation was over, but something in me had irrevocably shifted. I wasn't just Dean anymore, I was Dean, who had seen the echoes, who had felt the implanted despair, who now knew the true, horrifying nature of his inheritance. The house had shown me its teeth, and I had stared into the maw of its past. I clutched the faded photograph, my thumb tracing the ghost of my mother's smile. Her arm, my younger self, a moment of pure, unblemished light. It was a flimsy shield against the encroaching shadow, but it was something. It was a memory not tainted by the house, a warmth that hadn't been leached away. I remembered the sensation of her hand in mine, the solidness of her presence. That was what I needed to reclaim. Not the house, not the legacy, but me. I walked away. I simply did. I packed a single duffel bag, leaving everything else behind, the furniture, the books, the unsettling silence. The estate agent, a nervous woman who avoided my gaze, handled the sale. I didn't care about the price, I just wanted it gone, erased from my life. I moved to a city several states away, a place where the air felt different, cleaner, where the constant hum of traffic was a welcome distraction from the ringing in my ears. I found a small apartment, started looking for work. I tried to build a new life, brick by painstaking brick. For a while, it worked. The nightmares faded, replaced by mundane anxieties about rent and job interviews. I started sleeping through the night. I even started to believe I had truly escaped. At first, I dismissed them as fatigue, the lingering echoes of a traumatic experience. A faint murmur just at the edge of hearing, like a radio tuned to a frequency I couldn't quite catch. Sometimes, it sounded like a name or a sigh. I'd turn, expecting to see a neighbor, a colleague, but there was never anyone there. Not the deep, inky blackness of the house, but subtle shifts in light. I'd blink, rub my eyes, tell myself I was tired. But the frequency increased. One evening, I was walking home from a job interview. The city lights blurred around me, a comforting kaleidoscope. I pulled my jacket tighter. Then I caught a scent, faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Damp earth. Rotting leaves. The smell of the house. I stopped dead on the pavement, my breath catching. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by exhaust fumes and stale popcorn. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of memory. It was the knowledge that something had followed me, something that had embedded itself deeper than I'd realized. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. A gaunt figure in a reflection, gone when I turned. A flicker of movement in an empty doorway. My sleep grew restless again, punctuated by vivid, suffocating dreams that always ended with me trapped, unable to move, while something unseen pressed in on me. One morning, I woke up with a start, my heart hammering. I dreamt of the house, but it was different. The entity wasn't outside anymore. It was within. A few weeks later, I was offered a temporary contract. The work was unusual, involving the assessment of an old, decommissioned municipal building slated for demolition. It was an odd job, far from my usual line of work, but the pay was good, and I was desperate for the distraction. The site was a sprawling, forgotten complex on the outskirts of the city. The air inside was thick with dust and the metallic tang of decay. I made my way through crumbling offices, past rusted machinery, a heavy sense of foreboding settling over me. The walls were scarred, the paint peeling in long, brittle strips. The light from my headlamp struggled to penetrate the gloom. This was it. The foreman had mentioned it, almost as an afterthought. Just check the structural integrity here, Dean. I walked slowly, my boots scuffing on the gritty concrete. On one side, a row of heavy, rusted doors, each with a small, barred window. On the other, the solid, unyielding wall. The air here was different. I reached one of the doors, its surface flaking with rust. I peered through the grimy window. Nothing. But then, a sound. A faint, dragging scrape, like something being pulled across the floor. It came from inside the cell. I pressed my ear to the cold metal, straining to hear. Not the indistinct murmur I'd grown accustomed to, but a clear, guttural sound, like gravel grinding against stone. It wasn't speaking words, not really. It was a presence. A feeling. And then, I understood. The entity hadn't just followed me. It hadn't just latched onto me. It had become me. Or rather, I had become its vessel. The house was gone, but the curse, the legacy, had merely transformed. It had found a new home, a new way to exist, to feed. It had been waiting for me, not in the house, but in the bloodline, in the very fabric of my being. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the rusted handle of the cell door. I pulled. It groaned, resisting, then slowly, agonizingly, it opened. It was not empty. I felt it, a vast, hungry presence, familiar and utterly terrifying. It was the same presence that had haunted the estate, but now it was closer, intimately woven into my own consciousness. I wasn't free. I never would be. The escape had been an illusion. The entity hadn't just inhabited the house, it had inherited me. The corridor stretched before me, a path into an endless, internal prison.